I just need shelter tonight. Annie spoke while clutching the burlap bag tightly against her chest. Would that be all right, sir? Thomas Whitmore stood beneath the wide porch roof of his seaside estate, one hand gripping the collar of his robe against the cold wind lashing at him. No, he said. No, it would not. Annie swallowed hard. I understand, sir, but I don't need to come inside the house. I could stand in that corner over there, against the wall. I'll leave as soon as it's light out. Thomas looked her up and down. Her sneakers were caked with mud. Her jeans were soaked all the way to her knees. You are not sleeping on my porch. Please. Annie curled in on herself, pressing the wet bag tighter against her chest as another gust of wind swept across the steps. I just need somewhere to shelter for one night. I won't bother anyone. I promise. Thomas shifted his feet inside his house slippers. Warm light spilled through the open front door behind him, but the cold still slipped through his pajamas and thin robe. Less than 20 minutes earlier, he had been asleep in his comfortable bed upstairs. Now, in the middle of a cold, rain-soaked night by the sea, he was standing on his own porch, listening to a strange young woman plead for permission to sit beneath his roof. The door behind him opened wider. Grant Holloway, Thomas's head of security, stepped outside. He had thrown a rain jacket over a t-shirt and jeans. Mr. Whitmore, you should go back inside, Grant said. Then he turned to Annie. Miss, there are emergency shelters in town. That's where you need to go. Not here. I was trying to get to the hospital, Annie said. My grandmother is there. I took a wrong turn. Thomas narrowed his eyes at her. You're saying your grandmother is in the hospital, yet you got lost trying to reach her? Yes, sir. His gaze dropped once more to her soaked clothes and the burlap bag in her arms. You look old enough to find your own way to a hospital. Why didn't you use Google Maps like everyone else? My phone died. Your phone died? I was trying to call the hospital. The battery was already almost gone, and then it shut off completely. Thomas exhaled sharply through his nose. Then why didn't you call a cab? You could have gone to your grandmother instead of walking through a storm and ending up at my house, asking to sleep here. Annie lowered her eyes to the stone steps beneath her feet. I don't have money for a cab. Of course you don't. Annie raised her face. A flash of hurt crossed her eyes, but her voice remained so polite it almost seemed to irritate him more. Our house was damaged in the storm. I had a little money there, but after everything was torn apart, I couldn't find it. I asked a few people whether they could lend me enough for a ride. I also asked whether anyone could drive me to the hospital. She stopped and lightly bit her lip. No one said yes, so I walked. Grant folded his arms across his chest. And then you just happened to find this house? I only saw the lights. Annie replied. That's all. I didn't know who lived here. I just thought, maybe someone would let me stand under their porch roof until morning. Just then, a hard gust of wind drove the rain deep beneath the porch roof. Annie quickly stepped back, but water was already streaming from her sleeves and down over her fingers. Brown mud washed from the bottoms of her shoes, spreading across the pale stone in front of Thomas. Thomas looked at the stain near his feet and sighed. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Then his irritation flared. Look at that, he snapped. There's mud all over my porch now, and you said you wouldn't cause any trouble. Annie immediately stepped all the way back into the rain. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to. Then stop standing there. Please don't make me leave. Her voice trembled. She clutched the bag tighter as the rain poured down over her shoulders again. I'll clean it up. I won't stand on the stone anymore. I can sit on the ground if I have to. Tonight, I just need somewhere near a roof. Thomas stared at her. Everything I ask you, you have an excuse for. You got lost because your phone died. You walked because you have no money. You have no money because the storm took it. And now my porch is covered in mud because you're too cold to stand still. Annie struggled to keep her eyes from filling with tears. Yes, sir. I know it all sounds hard to believe. It sounds convenient. She looked at him, her lips pale from the cold. It doesn't feel very convenient to me. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind tore through the old oak trees at the edge of the lawn, bending their branches until the undersides of the leaves gleamed silver beneath the porch lights. Annie lowered her head. She was shivering so violently that the straps of the burlap bag trembled between her stiff fingers. My name is Annie Carter, she said. My grandmother became ill when the storm hit. Someone took her to the hospital while I was trying to find food and clothes for her. I don't know this area very well. And then my phone died. She drew in a short, unsteady breath. I'm not asking you to trust me forever. I'm only asking you not to send me back out onto that road tonight. Thomas pulled his robe tighter around himself. You are disturbing me, Annie Carter. Do you understand that? I should be asleep upstairs right now. I need a decent night's rest. Not to be standing out here in the cold because some girl I've never met suddenly appeared on my porch after midnight. Annie slowly nodded. I understand, sir. And I truly am sorry. Your apology does not explain why this has suddenly become my responsibility. It isn't your responsibility. Annie's voice grew softer, but this time it did not tremble. It is only your choice. Thomas's jaw tightened. She had not said it accusingly. She had not pleaded again, nor had she blamed him. And somehow, that made him more uncomfortable than anything else. Grant stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore, this has gone on long enough. I'll call county services and have someone take her somewhere else. Annie immediately turned back to Thomas. Sir, please don't send me away. Wherever you tell me to stay, I'll stay there. I can sit beside the steps. I'll leave before breakfast. I truly cannot keep walking in this cold. Thomas looked down at the bag she held tightly against her chest. Perhaps there were a few things inside for an elderly woman, he thought. Dry clothes, medicine. Something this girl had carried through the rain because someone, somewhere, needed it. From inside the house came the steady sound of footsteps. Martha Lewis appeared in the doorway, hurriedly pulling a wool cardigan closed over her nightclothes. The moment she saw Annie standing beneath the edge of the porch roof, she stopped short. Sir, Martha said quietly, that child is soaked through. Grant turned toward her. Martha, this is being handled. Handled? Martha looked at the rainwater running down Annie's pale face. By leaving her out there? Thomas frowned. I don't know anything about her. You know she's cold. That does not mean her story is true. Annie closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, the exhaustion on her face had turned into something even more painful than fear. Carefully, she placed the burlap bag on the dry edge of the lowest step. Then she held both hands out in front of her, so Thomas could clearly see that she was holding nothing. I don't have anything you need to be afraid of, sir, she said. I don't have any money. I don't have anywhere to sleep. I don't even know whether my grandmother is all right. Her voice caught, but she forced herself to finish. I'm only asking for one night beneath a roof. That is the last thing I have left to ask for. The rain continued to pour down in sheets. A fierce gust swept across the porch, making the hanging lantern shake violently overhead. Annie quietly pressed herself into the smallest dry space beside the stone wall. She had already stepped away from the warmth spilling out of the house, as though even that little bit of comfort was something she did not dare accept until someone gave her permission. Martha was the first to break the silence. Mr. Whitmore, whatever you decide after hearing the girl out, just look at her lips. They're turning blue. She cannot stay out there any longer. Grant shook his head. The moment she crosses that doorway, she is no longer someone standing at the gate. She becomes a guest on this property. You know that perfectly well. Annie immediately lifted her head. I don't need to be a guest, sir. Ma'am, I mean it. I can stay outside. Thomas looked down at her mud-caked shoes, then at the bag she was clutching tightly against her chest. You said your grandmother became ill while you were out looking for food. Start there. Annie rubbed her hands over the straps of the soaked canvas bag, trying to coax some feeling back into fingers that had nearly gone numb. My grandmother and I live near the fishing docks in Harbor Point. We sell whatever we can catch. Mostly blue crabs. Shrimp when the season is good. Fish when the water is generous. Grant gave a quiet sigh, making no effort to hide his impatience. Thomas heard it, but his eyes remained fixed on Annie's face. It's been raining since yesterday, she continued. At first, it wasn't coming down this hard. It was just steady. Grandma said we needed to pull the nets out before the tide got too high. The roof was leaking in the back room, so we moved the blankets into the kitchen and set pots and pans beneath the places where the water was dripping through. You live alone with her? Thomas asked. Yes, sir. She raised me. A strong gust of wind swept across the porch, sending Annie off balance. She quickly grabbed one of the columns to steady herself, then pulled her hand back the moment she realized she had left a muddy streak on the clean white paint. Thomas stared at the mark. I'm sorry, Annie whispered. He almost snapped at her again. but then he caught Martha quietly watching him. In the end, he said only, "Go on." Annie nodded. "This afternoon, I went down to the market to see if Mr. Jenkins had any bread left, or maybe some canned soup. Grandma hasn't been eating much, and her medicine upsets her stomach if she takes it without food. I was only gone about 40 minutes. She paused, her gaze slipping past Thomas toward the warmly lit foyer behind him. It was not the look of someone longing for the comfort inside. It was more as though she needed a quiet place to hold on to the memory of what had happened. When I got back, the water had already reached the front steps. Part of the roof had collapsed. Mr. Jenkins was standing outside the house calling for help because my grandmother had passed out in the kitchen. Martha raised a hand to her mouth. "Was your grandmother conscious?" Thomas asked. "Not really, sir. She opened her eyes once when they were putting her into Mr. Jenkins's truck. She called my name, but I don't think she truly knew I was there." "Then why didn't you go with her?" "I tried." Annie's voice caught in her throat. Mr. Jenkins said the truck was already too heavy to safely get through the floodwater with another person inside. His son was sitting in the back, holding Grandma up. He told me to go inside and get her medicine and some dry clothes, and that he would tell the hospital I was on my way. Thomas glanced at the bag again. "I ran into the house," Annie said. "I found Grandma's medicine on the shelf in the bathroom, and her church dress wrapped inside a plastic bag. I grabbed her sweater and her Bible, too. Then another part of the roof came down. The kitchen window shattered. Water rushed into the living room, and the floor began shaking beneath my feet." She pulled the bag even closer to her body. "I had to run out before I could find my wallet." "You mean to say the house collapsed because of the rain?" Grant asked, his voice cold and flat. Annie turned to look at him. "I mean it was an old house on low ground, sir. I mean that when I left, one of the walls was already leaning out toward the yard, and the place where my bed used to be was underwater." Grant said nothing. Thomas continued. "What did you do after you left the house?" "I went back to the market. Mr. Jenkins had already taken Grandma away. Everyone else was trying to save whatever they could from the flooding. I asked the store owner if he could lend me enough money for a cab. He said he couldn't. Then I asked Mrs. Daly, because Grandma sometimes brings her fish when her Social Security check is nearly gone." Annie gave a small shrug, embarrassed enough to seem as though she wanted to fold into herself. "She said she didn't keep any cash in the house." "No one offered to drive you?" Martha asked. Annie pressed her lips together. "No, ma'am." Thomas noticed how quickly she answered. It was the kind of answer people gave when they were trying to hide their humiliation rather than describe it. "You asked more than 2 people, he said. Annie looked at him briefly, then turned her face back toward the rain. "There was a man at the gas station with a pickup truck. I asked if he could take me to the hospital. I told him I would pay him as soon as I could." She swallowed hard. He looked at me, locked his truck doors, and said he didn't let strangers into his vehicle after dark. Martha's face hardened. "God help us. He didn't know me," Annie said quietly, almost as though she were trying to defend him. "He had no intention of knowing you," Martha replied. Thomas shifted where he stood, but this time he barely noticed the cold. "How did you know which hospital to go to?" "The cashier said the rescue crews were taking people to Whitmore Regional Hospital because the county clinic had lost power. She gave me directions, but I must have misunderstood them. I kept walking until my phone died. After that, I kept going because I thought I would eventually see a sign." Her eyes moved toward the yellow porch lights glowing above him. "But instead, I saw the lights from your house." Grant cleared his throat. "This is certainly an unfortunate situation, but her story does not prove where her grandmother is now." "I know it doesn't," Annie answered immediately. "Call the hospital. Ask about Evelyn Carter. Ask whether someone brought in an elderly woman from Harbor Point this afternoon, wearing a yellow raincoat and carrying a bag with a torn seam. Grandma always forgets to sew that tear shut." Her voice broke. This time she could not hide it. "Please, just ask if she's all right. I don't need to stay here. I don't need anyone to do anything for me. I just want to know whether my grandmother is still alive." If Annie's story touched your heart, please like this video and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of compassion, courage, and justice. Thomas could feel Martha's eyes on him. Grant stood waiting for instructions. As if one word from Thomas could place the whole matter back inside the neat rules and procedures he understood. Annie took a step backward. The heel of her shoe slipped off the wet stone, and she startled as she lost her balance. Even then, both hands held tightly to the bag, refusing to let it fall. Thomas reached into the pocket of his robe for his phone, but it was not there. He had left it charging beside his bed. For a moment, that irritated him, one more inconvenience in a night already overflowing with trouble. Then he turned toward the door. "Grant, bring me my phone." Grant did not move. "Sir, the county authorities can verify all of this." "I did not ask what the county authorities could do." Martha opened the front door wider. The warm light from inside spilled farther across the porch, stopping just short of Annie's shoes. Thomas turned back to the girl. "Step under the roof before you fall down. Not inside the house. Not yet, but at least get out of the rain." Annie hesitated, as though she had encountered so much coldness that she no longer knew how to accept a small kindness offered quietly. "Come here, child," Martha said gently. "Bring your grandmother's bag with you." Annie stepped beneath the covered porch. Mud and rainwater followed her onto the stone floor, but this time Thomas did not look down. She held the bag tightly against her chest and whispered, "Thank you, sir." Thomas did not answer. Grant returned with Thomas's phone in one hand and a folded towel in the other. He offered the phone first and kept the towel tucked against his side as if giving it to Annie would settle a question Thomas had not answered yet. Thomas noticed. "Give her the towel." Grant's mouth tightened. "Sir, once we start making her comfortable, she is standing on my porch dripping cold water from her sleeves." "Give her the towel." Grant handed it over without looking at Annie. She took it with both hands. "Thank you." She did not wrap it around herself. Instead, she opened the canvas bag and pressed the towel gently over the top of the plastic-wrapped Bible and the sleeve of her grandmother's dress. Martha let out a breath. "Honey, that towel was meant for you." "I know, ma'am. I just need to keep her things from getting worse." Thomas watched her blot rainwater from the bag with fingers that barely seemed able to bend. The name still moved through his mind. Evelyn Carter. It carried no clear face, no certain memory, only a pull he did not understand. He unlocked his phone. "What is your grandmother's full name?" "Evelyn Ruth Carter." "Date of birth?" Annie gave it to him at once. Thomas searched for the hospital's emergency department number. When the call connected, a recorded message began with instructions about storm delays and emergency access. Grant remained beside him, arms folded. Martha stepped close enough to Annie to catch her if her knees failed. After 2 transfers, a woman answered, "Whitmore Regional Emergency Department. This is Rachel." "This is Thomas Whitmore." There was a brief pause. "Mr. Whitmore, I am at my residence with a young woman named Annie Carter. She says her grandmother, Evelyn Ruth Carter, may have been brought to your emergency department from Harbor Point tonight. Mr. Whitmore, I can't release patient information without authorization from the patient or an appropriate family contact." Thomas looked at Annie. Her face had gone tense at the words "can't release." "She is here," he said. "I am putting her on speaker. She can identify herself." He pressed the speaker button and held the phone toward her. Rachel's voice came through the rain. "Miss Carter, can you tell me your full name and your relationship to Evelyn Carter?" "Annie Marie Carter. She's my grandmother. She raised me. And can you verify her date of birth and home address?" Annie answered. When she gave the address on Tidal Creek Road, her voice faltered. "That house may not be there anymore," she added. Rachel was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her tone had softened. "Miss Carter, your grandmother is here. She was brought in by an Earl Jenkins." Annie pressed one hand against her mouth. The canvas bag slipped against her hip, and Martha caught it before it fell. "Is she alive?" Annie asked. "Yes, she is alive." The sound Annie made was small, almost lost beneath the rain. Rachel continued. "She came in very cold, and with an irregular heart rhythm. The physician has her on a monitor, and we are treating her. She has been asking whether anyone has found you." Annie bowed her head. Her shoulders shook once. Then again, "I was trying to get there," she whispered. "Please tell her I was trying." "I will tell her. Are you somewhere safe now?" Annie looked at Thomas as though the answer belonged to him. He felt Grant turn toward him. Thomas cleared his throat. "She is at Whitmore Ridge. Then she is much closer than she thinks," Rachel said. "The access road from your side is still passable by 4-wheel drive." The lower road from Harbor Point is the one that flooded. Annie stared at the dark driveway behind her. She had walked for hours in the wrong direction, away from the only person she had left, and had ended within driving distance of the hospital without knowing it. "Can I talk to my grandma?" she asked. "Not yet, sweetheart. The team is working with her, and she needs to stay calm. But I can tell her you are safe and that you are coming." Annie closed her eyes. "Please do." Thomas ended the call only after Rachel gave him the direct number for the nurse's station. He stood with the phone in his palm, hearing the rain strike the roof above them. Grant was the first to speak. "Now that her story is confirmed, I can arrange a transport to the hospital." "In this weather?" Martha said. "She can barely stand. She wants to get there." Annie turned quickly. "I do. I need to see her." Thomas looked at the clock on his phone. Nearly 12:30. He looked at Annie's soaked clothes, the mud on her legs, and the towel she had used on her grandmother's belongings instead of herself. "You are not going anywhere dressed like that." Her face fell. "Sir, I have to. I did not say you were not going." His voice came out sharper than he intended. "I said you are not going like that." Martha nodded once, as if she had been waiting for him to catch up. "I have dry sweatpants and a sweatshirt that should fit her. She needs socks, a warm drink, and 5 minutes by the fire before anybody puts her back in a car." Grant stepped between the porch and the open doorway. "Mr. Whitmore, I need to advise against bringing her through the main house." Thomas looked at him. "Advise, noted." "Sir, there are protocols. There is an emergency room nurse waiting for this girl to reach her grandmother. She can wait in the service entrance." At that, Annie moved her gaze from Grant to Thomas. She did not protest. That was what troubled Thomas most. She had already learned to expect that even after telling the truth, even after it was confirmed, she might still be allowed in only through the back. Martha seemed to understand the same thing. She straightened her shoulders. "There is no good reason to make that child walk around this house in the rain to enter by a different door." Grant's face hardened. "Security is a good reason." "No," Thomas said. "Fear is your reason." Grant went still. Thomas stepped aside from the open front door. "Annie, bring your bag inside." She did not move immediately. "Inside, sir?" "Yes, inside." Her eyes filled again, but she blinked until the tears stayed where they were. She bent to lift the bag, swayed, and Martha caught her elbow. "Easy now," Martha said. "One step at a time." Annie crossed the threshold carefully, leaving damp footprints on the polished floor. Thomas saw them. For the first time that night, they did not anger him. Martha led her toward the small sitting room where a fire had burned down to glowing coals. Grant remained near the door, silent and dissatisfied. Thomas closed the front door against the rain, then looked at his phone. On the screen, the nurse's station number remained open beneath the name of the hospital he owned. "Get the Range Rover ready," he told Grant. "Clear. Whatever route is safest to Whitmore Regional." Grant stared at him. "You are taking her yourself?" Thomas looked down the hallway. Annie had lowered herself onto the edge of a chair, still holding her grandmother's bag in her lap while Martha wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "Yes," he said, "I am." Martha guided Annie into a sitting room off the foyer, where a low fire still glowed beneath a carved mantel. It was not the grand room Grant had been trying to protect. It had a worn leather sofa, a stack of newspapers by the hearth, and a knitted throw folded over the arm of a chair. Annie stopped on the rug as if she had crossed into a place where one wrong movement might send her back into the rain. "You can sit down," Martha said. Annie looked at the water dripping from her jeans. "I'll ruin the chair. It has survived worse than rain." "I can stand." Martha set a hand on her shoulder. "No, honey, you cannot." Annie lowered herself onto the edge of the leather chair, keeping the wet canvas bag in her lap. Martha wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, then crouched and began working at the laces of Annie's shoes. Annie drew her feet back. "Ma'am, you don't have to do that. I was a nurse before I worked in this house. I have taken off shoes in worse condition than yours." Martha tugged one lace loose. "Besides, your grandmother would want somebody looking after you until you get to her." At the mention of Evelyn, Annie stopped resisting. The first sneaker came away with a wet suction sound. Her sock underneath was soaked, and the skin at her heel was rubbed raw. Martha shook her head. "You walked on these feet? I didn't know how far it was." Thomas stood in the doorway, his phone still in his hand. He had changed nothing about himself except his expression. A few minutes earlier, he had seen a stranger making a mess on his porch. Now he saw what the walk had cost her. Grant appeared behind him. The Range Rover is being brought around. There is standing water near Willow Bend, but the upper access road is clear enough. How long to the hospital? Thomas asked. 20 minutes if the road holds. Annie pushed herself upright at once. The blanket slipped from one shoulder. I'm ready. You are not, Martha said. My grandma is there, and she will still need you able to stand when you arrive. I can stand. Her knees gave slightly before she finished the sentence. Thomas stepped forward without thinking, but Martha was already beside her, guiding her back into the chair. Thomas looked at Grant. Have someone bring dry towels to the car and call ahead. Tell the emergency department we are coming. Grant frowned. They already know she exists. There is no reason for you to make a personal appearance at this hour. Thomas's voice cooled. Get the car ready. Grant left without answering. Martha placed a pair of thick wool socks on the ottoman and turned toward the hallway. I have clothes upstairs that will do for now. Thomas, see that she drinks something warm. Annie looked quickly between them. Please don't go to trouble for me. I can get in the car like this. Martha continued toward the stairs. You can, but you will not. For the first time since the door had opened, Thomas was alone in the room with Annie. He had negotiated hospital acquisitions without discomfort. He had dismissed executives twice his age. Yet he stood uncertainly beside his own fireplace, while a girl in a blanket tried to hide her shivering. There is coffee, he said at last. Annie gave a weak shake of her head. No thank you, sir. Tia? No, sir. Hot chocolate? She hesitated. Thomas noticed. That was not a trick question. I don't want to make you do more than you already are. I am not making it myself. The answer came out dry. And to his surprise, the corner of Annie's mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it was the first sign that she had not been emptied entirely by the night. Thomas picked up the house phone and called the kitchen. He asked for hot chocolate and something simple to eat. I'm not hungry, Annie said when he hung up. Your grandmother would disagree. That silenced her. She looked down at the bag and brushed a bit of dried mud from the canvas. She always does that. She asks whether everybody else has eaten before she admits she hasn't. Thomas felt the same faint pull he had felt when she spoke her grandmother's name. Has she always lived in Harbor Point? All her life, as far as I know. She says the creek knows her better than most people do. She fishes for a living? Annie nodded. She used to take the boat out herself. Lately I go with her because her hands hurt, and she gets tired faster. We set crab traps and sell the catch by the docks. Some mornings she makes fish stew for people working early. Thomas did not answer. Annie glanced up. Did I say something wrong? No. He looked toward the fire. No, you did not. A member of the kitchen staff arrived with a tray holding a mug of hot chocolate, a bowl of chicken soup, crackers, and a folded cloth napkin. Annie stared at the food as though there had been a misunderstanding. I really only need to get to the hospital, she said. Thomas took the tray and placed it on the table beside her. Drink the chocolate. The car is not ready yet. She reached for the mug with both hands. The heat made her flinch. Then she cupped it carefully and held it close without drinking. Thank you, she said. Thomas nodded once. Martha returned with gray sweatpants, a clean sweatshirt, and a plastic shopping bag. Bathroom is through there, Annie. Put your wet clothes in this. I will not argue about it, so save your strength. Annie rose slowly, holding the bag of Evelyn's things against her side. You can leave that here by the fire, Martha said. Annie shook her head. I'd rather keep it with me. Martha studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, keep it with you. As Annie crossed toward the bathroom, the zipper on the canvas bag shifted open. A small Bible wrapped in cloudy plastic pressed against a folded blue dress, and tucked between them was the corner of a photograph. Thomas saw only a flash of a woman's hand resting on a child's shoulder before Annie pulled the bag closed again. Still, that brief glimpse disturbed something in him. Fish stew. Harbor Point. A woman called Evelyn. A kindness he had not allowed himself to think about in years. The bathroom door closed. Martha came back to the fire and lowered her voice. You recognize something? Thomas looked at her sharply. Why would you ask that? Because I have known you 9 years, and you have not looked that shaken since the night the hospital board tried to remove your name from the coastal clinic. He turned toward the window. Rain streamed down the glass in silver lines. I do not know, he said. Not yet. Grant appeared at the doorway again. Vehicle is ready. Road crew says we need to leave now before the water rises at Willow Bend. The bathroom door opened. Annie emerged in the clean clothes, sleeves hanging a little past her hands. Her wet hair remained tangled around her face, but color had begun to return to her lips. She held the canvas bag exactly as she had outside, close and careful. Thomas reached for his coat from the hall rack. Annie stared at him. You're really taking me yourself? He slipped one arm into the coat. Your grandmother is waiting. Outside, the Range Rover idled beneath the porch lights. Rain swept across the driveway, but this time Annie did not face it alone. Martha guided her toward the passenger door while Thomas followed, still hearing a name from long ago moving through the back of his mind. Evelyn Carter. Before the night was over, he intended to learn why he had never forgotten it. The Range Rover moved down the curved driveway at a careful pace, its headlights cutting across wind-bent palmettos and patches of standing water. Thomas drove with both hands on the wheel. He had told Grant to remain at the house and monitor the road reports. Grant had disliked the decision, but Thomas had lost interest in hearing the same objection in different words. Martha sat in the back with a thermos of hot chocolate, 2 dry towels, and Annie's wet clothes sealed in a laundry bag. Annie rode in the passenger seat with her grandmother's canvas bag on her lap. She had fastened the seat belt around herself, and the bag both, as if an abrupt stop might separate them. You can put that on the floor, Thomas said as he steered around a fallen pine limb. I'm all right holding it. You have not let go of it since you came to the house. It's all Grandma has with her now. Thomas glanced at the bag, then returned his eyes to the road. Tell me about her. Annie turned slightly in her seat. Why? The question was not rude. It was guarded. Because she is waiting for you in one of my hospitals. And because her name sounds familiar to me. Martha leaned forward a little. Annie ran her thumb over the damp seam of the bag. Her name is Evelyn Carter. Everybody down near the docks calls her Miss Evelyn. She sells blue crabs and shrimp when we catch enough. Fish on Fridays, mostly, because people coming home from work stop by for supper. Does she own a shop? Annie shook her head. Not anymore. She used to have a little stand by the old ferry landing. That was before the marina went in. Now she sells from a folding table outside our house, or from a cooler at the dock. Thomas loosened one hand from the wheel and pressed it briefly against his mouth. Martha noticed. Thomas? He did not answer her. The old ferry landing, he said. How long ago was that? Long before I was born. Annie looked at him. Sir, did you know my grandma? I do not know yet. The road dipped near Willow Bend. Brown water had spread across part of the pavement, reflecting the headlights in restless strips. Thomas slowed to a stop. Martha leaned forward. Can we cross that? Thomas watched a county utility truck push through from the opposite direction, water rising below its hubs. We can if we keep to the center. Annie looked beyond the windshield. Could somebody else have taken Grandma this way? Mr. Jenkins likely used the lower road before it flooded, Martha said. He got her there, honey. That is what matters. Annie nodded, but her hand moved to the zipper of the bag. She opened it enough to check the medication pouch inside, then closed it again. Thomas drove into the water. For several seconds, the tires pushed through with a low hiss while rain drummed on the roof. Annie held the bag tighter, her face fixed on the dark road ahead. When the vehicle climbed onto dry pavement again, she let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since the porch. Hospital is another 15 minutes, Thomas said. Thank you for taking me. He kept his eyes on the road. You thanked me already. I know. I just don't want you thinking I don't understand what you're doing. Thomas almost told her that driving a car did not make him generous. Not after leaving her in the rain while he questioned whether mud on his porch mattered more than her safety. Instead, he said, save your thanks until you are with your grandmother. They passed a gas station with its canopy lights still on. The convenience store windows were dark except for a battery-powered sign near the register. Annie turned her head toward it and shrank slightly into the seat. That the place you asked for help? Thomas asked. She nodded. Martha reached forward and touched Annie's shoulder. You need not tell us any more about it tonight. It's all right. Annie looked down at the bag. A man was filling gas cans. I asked him if he was going toward the hospital. He said no before I finished talking. Then I asked if I could use his charger for a few minutes. He looked at me and locked his truck. Thomas's hands tightened on the wheel. He might have been frightened, Annie said. So were you, Thomas replied. She looked at him, surprised. Thomas continued driving. Being afraid does not make every choice a decent one. For the next few miles, no one spoke. The rain softened from a steady pounding to a fine rattle across the windshield. Houses began appearing along the road, some dark, some lit by generators. At one driveway, an older man in a yellow raincoat stood beside a grill under a carport, handing paper plates to a family whose minivan was loaded with blankets. Farther on, volunteers outside a church carried bottled water into a fellowship hall. Annie watched them pass. Grandma would be helping over there if she could. You are certain of that? She's always been that way. She says you cannot thank God for a full table and then close your eyes when somebody else is hungry. Thomas felt the old memory press closer, still blurred at its edges. The hospital sign appeared ahead through the rain. Whitmore Regional Medical Center, emergency entrance. Annie sat forward so quickly the seatbelt caught her shoulder. That's it? That's it, Thomas said. He turned toward the emergency entrance, but Annie touched his sleeve. Wait. Thomas stopped before the covered drop-off lane. What is it? She unzipped the canvas bag and removed the blue dress and cardigan, checking them with shaking hands. A plastic-wrapped Bible came next. When she lifted it, a photograph slid from between the pages and fell onto the center console. Thomas glanced down before Annie could retrieve it. The picture showed a younger Evelyn standing beside a weathered fish stand, one hand resting on the shoulder of a small child. She wore a flowered apron and a wooden cross at her neck. Her smile leaned slightly to one side. Thomas stopped breathing for a moment. He knew that apron. He knew the little wooden cross. He knew the woman's hand, because years ago it had placed a bowl of fish stew in front of a hungry young man who had nowhere to sleep. Annie picked up the photograph. That's Grandma. When I was little. Thomas stared at her. His voice came out lower than before. Your grandmother sold fish at the ferry landing. Yes, sir. And she made stew after closing time. Annie's brow furrowed. How would you know that? The emergency doors opened ahead of them, and a nurse stepped under the canopy, scanning arriving cars. Thomas shifted into park, but his hand remained on the gear selector. Because, he said, looking at the photograph in Annie's hand, a long time ago, your grandmother fed me when I had nothing. Annie did not move. Martha closed her eyes for a second, understanding before Annie could. Thomas opened his door and stepped into the cool hospital light. Come on. Let's get you to her first. There will be time for the rest after she knows you made it. Annie stared at Thomas across the console, the photograph held between both hands. You knew my grandma? Thomas shut the driver's door again without getting out. Rain ticked against the windshield, softer now, while ambulances moved beneath the emergency entrance canopy ahead of them. I knew a woman who looked exactly like the woman in that picture, he said. Her name was Evelyn. She sold fish near the old ferry landing. She had a cross around her neck and a way of talking to people as though they had already been forgiven for whatever trouble brought them to her door. Annie looked down at the photograph. That sounds like Grandma. Martha leaned forward from the back seat. Thomas, how long ago was this? 28 years. Annie lifted her eyes. What did she do for you? Thomas looked toward the glowing emergency entrance. He had not told this story in years. Not even when newspapers asked about the difficult beginning of his career. He had spoken about hard work, long hours, and opportunity. Those answers had sounded respectable. None of them included a fish seller who had given him dinner when he did not have the courage to admit he was starving. I was 22, he said. I had left home after a fight with my father. I thought pride could carry me farther than it did. My truck broke down outside Harbor Point. I had no job, almost no cash, and no one willing to take my call. I spent one night behind a closed bait shop and most of the next day looking for work. Annie said nothing. The bag rested across her knees, and the cardigan inside it was now close enough to the hospital to reach Evelyn. Your grandmother found me sitting by the ferry landing after the market had closed. I told her I was fine. She told me I was a poor liar. A faint smile touched his face, then disappeared. She brought me a bowl of fish stew and a piece of cornbread. When I tried to refuse, she said, "Eat first. Explain later." Annie's expression softened. "She still says that. I hoped she might." Thomas pressed his thumb against the steering wheel. "She let me sleep on her sofa. The next morning, she gave me one of her husband's clean shirts and $40 to get to a job interview in Charleston. I told her I would pay her back." "Did you?" "No." The answer sat heavily in the car. "Not because I forgot. I went back 6 months later, but her stand was gone. The ferry area had started changing. I asked around and never found her. After a while, I told myself she had moved away, that she was fine, that donating to clinics and food programs counted for something." Martha spoke quietly. "It counted for something. It simply wasn't the same thing." Thomas nodded. "No, it was not." Annie lowered the photograph into her lap. "Grandma never told me she helped you. She probably did not think feeding a hungry young man was a story worth telling." "That sounds like her, too." A nurse approached the passenger side under a large umbrella. Thomas lowered Annie's window a few inches. "Mr. Whitmore?" the nurse asked. "Yes. I'm Rachel Monroe. I spoke with Miss Carter on the phone. Evelyn has been moved to cardiac observation. The doctor is with her now, but Annie may come up as soon as registration verifies her relationship." Annie unfastened her seatbelt before Rachel had finished. "Can I see her?" "We will get you there as quickly as we can." Thomas stepped out into the rain and came around the front of the vehicle. Annie opened her door, but when her feet touched the pavement, her knees buckled. Thomas caught her forearm before she fell. "I'm okay," she said quickly, embarrassed. "No, you are not. That does not mean you cannot go to her." Martha took the canvas bag while Thomas helped Annie under the canopy. Rachel brought a wheelchair, but Annie shook her head. "I can walk." "You already proved that," Rachel said. "Sit down before your grandmother sees you and tries to get out of bed to take care of you." That argument worked. Annie sat, gripping the arms of the chair while Martha placed Evelyn's bag carefully on her lap. The emergency entrance opened, releasing warm air, the smell of disinfectant, and the sound of phones ringing behind the reception desk. Thomas had walked through those doors hundreds of times for meetings, donor tours, ribbon cuttings, and inspections. Tonight, the hospital looked different from the level of a girl carrying wet clothes to a sick grandmother. A receptionist recognized him and began to rise. Thomas stopped her with a small gesture. "Help Ms. Carter first." Rachel rolled Annie toward registration. "Annie, I need a photo identification if you have one." Annie looked stricken. "It was in the house. I don't have anything except my name and Grandma's information." Thomas saw fear return to her face. One more barrier. One more person asking her to prove she belonged to the woman who had raised her. Rachel bent down so Annie could see her clearly. "That's all right. We have other ways to verify family during an emergency. Do you know your grandmother's birthday, medications, or primary doctor?" Annie answered every question without hesitation. Evelyn's birthday, the name of her heart medication, the clinic where she saw Dr. Bell twice a year, the scar beneath her left thumb from cleaning oysters when she was young. Rachel smiled gently. "That is more than enough for me to start." While the staff completed the forms, Thomas stood several feet away, wet hair combed back by his hand, rain darkening the shoulders of his coat. Martha came beside him. "You went looking for her?" she asked. "I did, once, and when you did not find her, you stopped." He did not defend himself. "Yes." Martha watched Annie clutch the bag as Rachel explained where Evelyn had been taken. "Then perhaps tonight is not about whether you found her soon enough. Perhaps it is about what you do now, that she is in front of you again." Before Thomas could answer, Rachel returned. "She can go up," the nurse said. "Evelyn is awake, but she is frightened and very tired." Annie rose from the wheelchair, refusing it now with enough strength that Rachel allowed her to walk. The elevator ride felt longer than it was. Annie held Evelyn's blue dress against the bag, her thumb moving back and forth across the fabric. When the doors opened, Rachel led them down a quiet corridor to a room with a glass panel beside the door. Inside, Evelyn Carter lay beneath a white blanket, her gray hair damp against the pillow, a heart monitor blinking beside her bed. Annie stopped breathing. Then Evelyn turned her head, saw her granddaughter, and whispered, "Baby." Annie crossed the room in 3 steps and took her grandmother's hand. "I'm here, Grandma. I'm here." Evelyn closed her fingers weakly around Annie's. I knew you'd find me. Thomas remained outside the doorway. He could see the wooden cross at Evelyn's throat, resting against the hospital gown. After all those years, he did not need the photograph anymore. Annie did not let go of Evelyn's hand. She bent over the bed, trying to smile while tears ran down her face and fell onto the white blanket. I brought your sweater, she said, and your blue dress. Your medicine too. I got everything I could. Evelyn's eyes moved to the canvas bag on the chair beside the bed. You went back in that house? Only long enough to get your things. You should not have done that. I wasn't leaving your Bible behind. A tired smile touched Evelyn's mouth. Stubborn child. You taught me. The heart monitor continued its steady pattern, though now and then an uneven beat changed the rhythm. Annie heard every one of them. She moved the blue cardigan from the bag and laid it across Evelyn's arms, as if the familiar cloth could make the hospital room feel less strange. Evelyn looked toward the doorway. Who brought you here? Annie turned. Thomas was still standing outside the room, one hand in the pocket of his wet coat. He had faced investors, surgeons, lawyers, and reporters without hesitation, but he seemed unsure whether he belonged in this doorway. Annie wiped her cheeks with her sleeve. Grandma, there's a man here who says he knows you. Evelyn narrowed her eyes, trying to focus. At this hour, Thomas gave a small, embarrassed breath, then walked in. He stopped beside the foot of the bed, not close enough to presume affection, not far enough to pretend he was only visiting a patient. Good evening, Miss Evelyn. The old woman studied him. His silvered hair, clean-shaven face, and expensive coat offered her nothing familiar. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his coat and took out his wallet. Behind several cards and a folded receipt was a small, yellowed piece of paper protected in thin plastic. He unfolded it carefully and held it where she could see. Evelyn blinked at the handwriting. Her own handwriting. Thomas spoke quietly. You once told a young man that when his door got bigger than yours, he should not forget to open it. For a moment, Evelyn lay perfectly still. Then her eyes moved from the note to his face. Tommy? The name seemed to strip away every polished year Thomas had put between himself and the young man he had once been. Yes, ma'am. Evelyn's fingers lifted weakly from the blanket. Thomas stepped forward at once and took her hand in both of his. He lowered himself into the chair beside her bed. His head bowed. Well, look at you, she said. Her voice was faint, but the old warmth was there. You filled out. A surprised laugh escaped Annie before she could stop it. Thomas laughed too, though his eyes had filled. I suppose I did. And you kept that little piece of paper all this time? I kept it. I should have found you. Evelyn squeezed his hand with what little strength she had. People get busy surviving. I never gave you soup so you would spend your life apologizing for eating it. Thomas looked down at their hands. Hers was smaller than he remembered. The knuckles shaped by age and years of cold water, fishing line, and kitchen work. I went back to the ferry landing, he said. Your stand was gone. They moved all of us out when the marina came through. Said progress needed the view. She closed her eyes for a second, then opened them again. I heard about your hospitals. Never knew if it was the same Tommy, but I hoped it was. It was. Then that $40 did all right. Annie looked between them. $40? Thomas turned to her. Your grandmother gave me money for a bus ticket and a meal after she let me sleep in her house. I had a job interview in Charleston the next morning. Evelyn corrected him. I gave you $38 and 2 bus tokens. $40 sounds better in a rich man's story. This time Thomas's laugh broke into a quiet sob. He pressed her hand gently to his forehead. A knock sounded at the open door. A physician in blue scrubs stepped inside, followed by Rachel Monroe. The warmth in the room changed at once. Annie stood straighter. Miss Carter, I'm Dr. Michael Bell from cardiology, he said. Your grandmother's rhythm has not settled the way we hoped. She is stable right now, but she has fluid stress on her heart, and I recommend we move her to the cardiac unit and perform a procedure in the morning. Annie's face drained. A procedure? Nothing we would do without explaining it carefully. We need to help her heart keep a steady rhythm and watch her closely through the night. Evelyn looked at Annie, not the doctor. Baby, breathe. I am breathing. No, you're holding it. I know the difference. Annie pulled in a shaking breath. Is she going to be okay? Dr. Bell answered with care. She is in the right place. She got here in time. We need to act responsibly now. Rachel handed Annie a clipboard with consent forms and insurance. Thomas saw the line she had reached. Insurance information, responsible party, estimated out-of-pocket responsibility. Annie turned toward the doctor. I don't know what insurance card she had. It might have been in the house. I don't know if it was saved. Evelyn's hand tightened over the blanket. I have Medicare, honey. There is a little supplemental card in my purse. Mr. Jenkins took you without your purse, Annie said. Dr. Bell stepped closer. We will treat your grandmother regardless of paperwork tonight. Our financial staff can help you later. Annie nodded, but Thomas saw what had entered her mind. The house gone, the fishing boat gone, and now a bill large enough to follow them long after the rain stopped. He rose from the chair. Doctor, do what she needs. Dr. Bell looked at him. Of course, Mr. Whitmore. Thomas turned to Annie. You will sign whatever is needed as her granddaughter. You will ask every question you want answered, but you will not spend another minute worrying about the cost. Annie stared at him. Sir, no. I cannot let you do that. You are not letting me. I am telling you what will happen. My grandma did not help you, so you would owe us someday. Thomas looked at Evelyn, then back at Annie. I know that. Then you don't have to pay her back. This is not payment. His voice softened. Payment would mean what she gave me had a price. It did not. This is my turn to stand in the rain for her. Annie's mouth trembled. She looked at her grandmother for permission to accept something neither of them had ever imagined needing. Evelyn watched Thomas for a long moment. You still do not listen easy, do you, Tommy? No, Mum. Then do one thing right. Help the girl eat something before morning. She forgets herself when she is scared. I will, and no fussing over me like I'm already gone. Thomas managed to smile. I can agree to the first one. Rachel stepped toward the bed to prepare Evelyn for transfer. Annie leaned down and kissed her grandmother's forehead. I'm staying with you. I know you are, Evelyn whispered. You always come when it matters. As the staff rolled Evelyn toward the cardiac unit, Annie walked beside the bed, one hand resting over her grandmother's. Thomas followed a few steps behind, carrying the damp canvas bag himself. He had spent years believing he owed Evelyn a debt. Now, with her wet cardigan folded under his arm and her granddaughter walking in front of him, he understood it was never a debt she had left him. It was a door, and at last he had reached the moment when opening it mattered. The cardiac floor was quieter than the emergency department. The elevators opened onto a corridor lit low for the night shift, with nurses moving between rooms in soft-soled shoes and monitors sounding behind closed doors. Annie walked beside Evelyn's bed until a nurse held up a hand at the doors to the treatment area. You can come back once we have her settled, Rachel told her. Annie held on to her grandmother's hand until the bed moved beyond her reach. Grandma? Evelyn turned her head against the pillow. I'm right here, baby. Then the doors swung shut between them. Annie stood staring at the narrow glass windows as though she might still see Evelyn through them if she did not blink. Thomas stopped several feet away, the damp canvas bag hanging from one hand. Martha stood beside Annie, ready to catch her again, but this time Annie remained on her feet. A clerk approached with a clipboard. Miss Carter, we need a few signatures for admission to cardiac observation. Annie accepted the pen. Her hand shook so much that the first letter of her name came out crooked. She read every line she could understand, then looked helplessly at the spaces asking for address and emergency contact. Put my number down, Thomas said. Annie looked up. Sir, you don't have to do that. Your phone is dead. Your grandmother needs someone the hospital can reach. I can give them Mr. Jenkins's number. I know it by heart. Give them his too. Thomas pulled a card from his wallet and placed it on the counter. But put mine first tonight. The clerk glanced at the name on the card, recognized it, and straightened. Thomas's tone hardened before she could say anything. Miss Carter is the family member. Direct questions about Mrs. Carter's care to her. My name changes nothing about that. Annie heard him. For the first time since she had arrived on his porch, someone with power was making room for her rather than speaking over her. She filled out the forms as best she could. When she reached the address line, the pen stopped again. Martha touched her arm. What is it, sweetheart? Annie stared at the blank space. I don't know what to write. Your home address. There isn't a home there anymore. The words came out flat, as though they belonged to someone else. She wrote the address anyway. 214 Tidal Creek Road, Harbor Point, South Carolina. Then she set the pen down before her fingers lost control of it. Thomas had heard about the house, but hearing Annie say it under the bright hospital lights made the fact heavier. A patient could be treated, released, sent home with instructions and medicine. What happened when home was a wet pile of boards beside the marsh? Rachel returned with a hospital bracelet and a paper cup. Annie, your grandmother asked that you keep her Bible safe. She also asked whether you had eaten. A broken laugh escaped Annie. Of course she did. I told her I would find out. Rachel held out the cup. Water first, food next. That order came from your grandmother, not from me. Annie drank because Evelyn had asked. Thomas saw how quickly she obeyed a woman who was not even in the hallway anymore. Martha pointed toward a small family waiting room. Come sit down. You have already walked enough tonight. I want to be close when they take her in. The waiting room is 20 feet from those doors. Annie allowed herself to be led inside. The room had blue vinyl chairs, a coffee machine, a television with the sound turned off, and a window streaked with rain. Someone had left a church bulletin on a side table beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. Thomas placed Evelyn's bag on the chair next to Annie, careful not to set it on the floor. Thank you, she said. For carrying a bag? For not letting anybody take it away from me. He understood then that she meant more than the bag. Martha disappeared and returned with soup from the overnight cafeteria, saltine crackers, and a turkey sandwich wrapped in plastic. Annie shook her head when she saw the tray. I can't eat while Grandma's in there. Thomas pulled a chair across from her. Your grandmother specifically instructed me to make sure you ate. She always tells people what to do. Yes, he said. I remember. That earned him the smallest smile. Annie opened the crackers, ate one slowly, then another. Was she always like this? Thomas asked. Like what? Giving orders while she is the one in a hospital bed. Annie broke a cracker in half. When I was 11, she had pneumonia, could barely breathe. Still called our neighbor to remind him his grandson needed a birthday cake. She looked toward the treatment doors. She makes you feel taken care of even when she is the one hurting. Thomas nodded. She did that for me too. Rain slid down the waiting room window. The hospital lights reflected against the dark glass, hiding the flooded coast outside. Annie looked at him after a while. Did you really keep her note all those years? I did. Why? Thomas considered telling her he was grateful. That would have been true, and not enough. Because there were times I made decisions I knew she would not be proud of. The note reminded me there had been a version of me worth helping. Annie studied him. Grandma wouldn't say it that way. No? She'd say being worth helping isn't something you earn after you're already doing well. Thomas lowered his eyes. That sounds like her. The doors opened before Annie could answer. Dr. Bell entered the waiting room, removing his surgical cap. Annie rose so quickly the soup nearly spilled. Your grandmother is stable, he said. We performed a cardioversion to restore a steadier rhythm and adjusted her medication. Her heart has been under strain, and she will need several days here while we monitor her. Annie put one hand over her mouth. Can I see her? In a few minutes. She is sleepy, but I expect her to improve with rest. What about after she leaves? Thomas asked. Dr. Bell looked toward Annie before answering. She will need a safe place to recover. Dry, warm, minimal stairs, reliable electricity, follow-up visits. Annie lowered her hand. The relief in her face gave way to the same fear Thomas had seen at the registration desk. We can manage, she said too quickly. Thomas looked at her. Annie, we will. The county has shelters. Mr. Jenkins might know somebody with room for a while. I can work. I can replace what she needs. You cannot replace a house overnight. Her voice rose before she could stop it. Then what am I supposed to do? She has nobody else. Thomas did not answer at once. He looked through the rain-streaked window toward the coast where a house had stood that morning, and then at Evelyn's canvas bag sitting in the hospital chair like the whole surviving inventory of a life. You are supposed to stay beside your grandmother tonight, he said. Let me think about tomorrow. Annie wiped at her face, angry with herself for crying again. I don't want charity. No. Thomas said quietly. "You want your home back." She looked at him, and neither of them spoke. A nurse appeared at the door and smiled at Annie. "Your grandmother is asking for her girl." Annie picked up the bag and hurried after her. Thomas remained by the window, listening to her footsteps fade down the corridor. For 28 years he had carried Evelyn's words in his wallet. Tonight, he began to understand that opening a door was not the end of a promise. Sometimes it was only the beginning. Annie found Evelyn awake, though her eyelids were heavy from the procedure. The blue cardigan lay folded over the rail of the bed, and the little Bible rested on the table beside a plastic cup of ice chips. A nurse adjusted the monitor leads, smiled at Annie, and left them alone for a few minutes. Evelyn turned her head. "Doctor says my heart has decided to behave for now." Annie sat beside her and took her hand. "He says you need to stay a few days." "That sounds expensive." "Don't worry about that tonight." Evelyn studied her face. Even tired, she could hear what Annie was trying not to say. "What did Tommy do?" "He told the doctor to take care of you and said he would handle whatever insurance doesn't." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. "That boy always did have a hard time accepting a simple kindness." "Grandma, your kindness got him to an interview. He says it changed his whole life. I gave him stew and bus fare. What he did after that was his doing. You also gave him a place to sleep." Evelyn looked toward the rain-blurred window. There was a storm that night too. Not this much rain, but cold enough. He was sitting under that old market awning with his shoes coming apart, and his stomach so empty he could barely look at food without shaking. A person cannot see that and walk past. Annie lowered her eyes. "Some people can." Evelyn heard the change in her voice. "Who turned you away?" "It doesn't matter now. It matters if it hurt you." Annie pressed her thumb along the back of Evelyn's hand. "I asked people for a ride. I asked to borrow money. Nobody wanted to get involved. Then when I reached Mr. Whitmore's house, he thought I was making excuses. He got angry because I tracked mud onto his porch." Evelyn sighed, not with surprise but sadness. "And he let you in?" "Eventually." "Eventually is not as good as immediately." A faint smile softened her words. "But it is better than never." Annie leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I don't want him paying for everything because he feels guilty. We're not something he has to fix." "No, baby, we are not." Evelyn's fingers closed around hers. "But receiving help does not make you smaller. A hand held out in kindness is not a chain unless somebody tries to use it that way." There was a light knock at the door. Thomas stood outside with Martha beside him. He had removed his wet coat and now wore a dark hospital pullover someone had found for him. He seemed less like the owner of the building than a man uncertain how far he was permitted to enter. Evelyn lifted 2 fingers. "Come in, Tommy. You are making that doorway look uncomfortable." Thomas stepped inside. Martha carried a tray holding soup, toast, applesauce, and a paper cup of coffee for Annie. "Your grandmother gave orders," Martha said. "I was told you were not to keep watch on an empty stomach." Annie looked at Evelyn. "You have barely been awake 10 minutes. Plenty of time to know my girl." Thomas drew a chair close to the foot of the bed. "Dr. Bell believes you will recover well, provided you rest and have a safe place when you leave." Evelyn's eyes met Annie's. Neither answered. Thomas continued carefully. "I understand your home was badly damaged." Annie stared down at the tray. "It's gone." Evelyn's expression changed. The last hope she had been protecting slipped away without drama. "All of it?" Annie nodded. "I got your clothes and medicine. The front wall went down after they took you away. The boat is gone too." For a long moment, only the monitor filled the room. Evelyn turned her head toward the window, though there was nothing beyond it but black glass and rain. "My Henry built that porch," she said at last. "Did I ever tell you that, Annie? Took him 2 summers because he kept measuring wrong and blaming the boards." Annie wiped her cheeks. "You told me. That is where your mama sat when she brought you home from the hospital." Evelyn pressed her lips together. A house should not be allowed to disappear before a person can say goodbye to it. Thomas looked down at his hands. He had been prepared for gratitude or refusal, not grief quiet enough to make him feel like an intruder. "Mrs. Carter," he began, "there are arrangements I can make." Evelyn turned back to him. "Do not start by buying away my sadness, Tommy." He accepted the correction. "No, ma'am. We lost our home. Let us be sad about that before you solve anything. Yes, ma'am. Martha moved closer to the bed and gently adjusted the blanket around Evelyn's shoulders. There will be time for plans after you have slept. Evelyn managed a small nod. Plans sound better after breakfast. Thomas stood. Then I will speak with you after breakfast. Annie looked up quickly. Where are you going? To make sure you have somewhere to sleep tonight that is near this room, not across town in a shelter. Nothing more than that without your grandmother's agreement. Evelyn watched him a moment. You learned some manners after all. I had an excellent teacher. Rachel returned with medication and explained that Evelyn needed quiet. Martha guided Annie to eat half the soup before allowing her to settle into the reclining chair beside the bed. Annie resisted until Evelyn murmured, "Do not make an old woman worry after the doctor fixed her heart." That ended the argument. Outside the room, Thomas walked with Martha toward the elevators. The hospital corridor was almost empty now. Somewhere downstairs, a floor polisher hummed across tile, and the rain continued tapping the windows. "You are thinking about the house," Martha said. "I am thinking about where she goes when she is discharged." That is not quite the same thing. Thomas stopped beside the window at the end of the corridor. In the dark beyond the parking lot lay Harbor Point, the flooded roads, the fishing docks, and a patch of land where Evelyn's porch had stood that morning. "She gave me a place to start over," he said. "I cannot send her from my hospital to a cot in a gymnasium." Martha folded her arms. "Then do not send her anywhere. Ask her what home means, and help her get back to it." Thomas looked at the light from Evelyn's room spilling beneath the door. For the first time that night, his decision did not feel complicated. It only needed to be made with enough respect that the woman who once opened her small house to him could still call the next place her own. By morning, the rain had weakened to a gray mist against the hospital windows. Annie woke in the reclining chair with a stiff neck and the corner of Evelyn's blanket tucked over her knees. She did not remember her grandmother covering her, but she knew Martha had not done it. Martha would have used the spare blanket folded on the shelf. Evelyn had used what she had. A breakfast tray sat beside the bed. Oatmeal, scrambled eggs, wheat toast, and coffee in a paper cup. Evelyn had eaten 2 bites of oatmeal and was now inspecting a packet of sugar as though the hospital had offended her personally. "They give a woman half a spoonful of sugar and call that breakfast," she said. Annie sat up. "You're complaining. That means you feel better. I feel well enough to know oatmeal needs help." A knock sounded, and Thomas entered carrying 2 cups from the cafeteria and a folded newspaper beneath his arm. Martha followed with a small bag from a pharmacy. "Good morning," Thomas said. Evelyn glanced at the coffee in his hand. "That for me?" Dr. Bell said decaffeinated only. "Then it is not for me." Martha smiled and set the pharmacy bag beside Annie. "A charger for your phone, toiletries, and socks that fit better than mine." Annie looked inside the bag. "Mrs. Lewis, you didn't have to do this." "No, but I wanted to. There is a difference." Thomas remained near the foot of Evelyn's bed. "Dr. Bell says you may be here another 3 days, perhaps 4. That gives you time to stop standing around looking worried," Evelyn said. "You always looked worried when you were young, too. I had more reason then. You had fewer wrinkles then." Annie laughed, and Thomas did too. The laughter lasted only a moment before Evelyn noticed the newspaper in his hand. The front page showed photographs of flooded roads and damaged homes around Harbor Point. "Is our place in there?" she asked. Annie's smile disappeared. Thomas put the newspaper behind him. "No, ma'am. But it is gone." "Yes." Evelyn looked toward Annie. "You saw it come down?" Annie nodded. "I got out first. I had your bag. That is all I need to know." Evelyn took her granddaughter's hand and held it. "A house can be mourned. A child cannot be replaced." Thomas lowered his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than it had been the night before. "Mrs. Carter, I would like to ask you something, and I want you to know before I ask that you may say no." Evelyn looked at him over the top of her breakfast tray. "That sounds expensive." "It may be. Go on. When you are strong enough, I would like to take you and Annie back to your property. I want to see what remains and learn what you need. Not what I think you should have, what you need." Annie glanced at him. "Mr. Whitmore," he held up a hand gently. "I am not asking you to decide anything this morning." Evelyn studied him for a long moment. "You are thinking about building something. I am thinking about helping you return home. There is no home to return to. Then I would like to help put one back." Annie stood from the chair. Sir, the hospital bill is already too much. We cannot take a house from you. Thomas faced her. Annie, your grandmother did not hand me a bowl of stew and ask whether I could afford to accept it. That was supper. This is a house. Yes, he said, because this is what the rain took from you. Evelyn drew a slow breath. Sit down, Tommy. Thomas obeyed. He pulled a visitor's chair close to the bed. If you do this, she said, you do not build me a rich man's idea of what a poor woman ought to be grateful for. I would not. You do not buy my land and give me permission to live on it. The land remains yours. You do not put your name over my door. No, ma. And you do not make Annie feel like every good thing in her future came from owing you. Thomas looked at Annie before answering. I understand. Evelyn's mouth softened. No, you do not. Not yet, but you may learn. Dr. Bell entered before Thomas could reply. He examined Evelyn, asked about dizziness and chest pressure, then told her the medication adjustment was working. If the next 2 days went well, she could be discharged with restrictions. No lifting, no cold exposure, no climbing steps unnecessarily, and reliable power for any medical equipment they might prescribe. Thomas listened to every word. 2 days later, Evelyn left the hospital in a wheelchair, wearing the blue dress Annie had carried through the rain and her cream cardigan buttoned to the throat. Annie walked beside her, one hand on the canvas bag and the other on the wheelchair handle. Thomas waited near the curb with the Range Rover. He did not mention the invoice the hospital would never send to Evelyn. The drive to Harbor Point was quiet. Roads had reopened, but piles of wet furniture and broken boards lined the shoulders. Church volunteers handed out bottled water from folding tables. At one corner, a family stood beside a ruined sedan, while a man in work gloves helped them load blankets into a van. When Thomas turned onto Tidal Creek Road, Annie reached for Evelyn's hand. Their lot came into view slowly. The water had gone down, leaving mud, broken planks and marsh grass, tangled around what remained of the foundation. One porch step still stood crooked near the edge of the yard. A length of fishing net hung from an oak limb. Evelyn stared at it without speaking. Thomas parked and opened her door. We can leave if this is too much. No, Evelyn said. A person should say goodbye properly. Annie helped her to the old step. Evelyn bent as far as her healing body allowed and placed her fingers on the weathered wood. Henry built this, she said, badly, but with love. Annie crouched beside her, crying now. Thomas gave them time. Then he brought a narrow tube from the vehicle and removed a set of plans. Evelyn looked up. You did not waste any time. I asked an architect what could be built safely here, only if you approve it. He opened the drawings on the hood of the vehicle. A modest raised cottage with a broad front porch, storm shutters, a first-floor bedroom, a ramp instead of steep steps, a backup generator and a storage shed for fishing gear. Annie touched the drawing of the porch. It looks like hers. It is meant to, Thomas said. Evelyn looked from the plans to the ruined step, then to Thomas. Make the porch wide enough for somebody caught in the rain. Thomas nodded. Yes, ma'am. And put a bench there. A bench? So nobody ever has to ask to sit on the ground. Thomas folded his hands over the plans. A bench it is. 3 months later, the first thing Evelyn noticed was the bench. Thomas had arranged for her and Annie to stay in a small furnished apartment near the hospital while the house was rebuilt. He paid the rent through an emergency recovery fund and made certain the lease carried Evelyn's name, not his. She had noticed that too. She noticed everything. The morning they returned to Tidal Creek Road, the sky was clear and the marsh shone beneath the October sun. Annie drove the used sedan Thomas had helped her find through a local dealer, while Evelyn sat beside her in a blue headscarf and the cream cardigan she had worn out of the hospital. Thomas followed in his own car with Martha. When Annie turned into the gravel drive, Evelyn lifted a hand to her mouth. The new house stood on raised pilings above the ground the rain had covered. It was not grand. Thomas had kept his promise. The siding was pale yellow, the shutters deep green, and the roof sloped low over a wide front porch. A ramp curved gently from the driveway to the steps. Beside the door was a wooden bench with room for 3 people, protected from wind and rain. Evelyn did not speak until Annie parked. Well, she said, her voice unsteady, somebody finally built Henry's porch the way he meant to. Annie laughed and cried at the same time. She hurried around the car, but Evelyn waved her back. Let me get out like a grown woman. I have a new heart rhythm, not new legs. Thomas had reached them by then. Good morning, Miss Evelyn. She took his offered arm after only a brief pause. Morning, Tommy. I see you listened about the bench. I had strict instructions. And the kitchen? Perhaps you should inspect it before you approve anything. Several neighbors waited near the side yard. Earl Jenkins stood with his cap in both hands and a cooler full of blue crabs beside his boots. Reverend Isaiah Green had brought members of the church with pans of baked macaroni, collard greens, and peach cobbler. Martha carried a basket of cornbread wrapped in a clean dish towel. No reporters stood in the yard. Thomas had made sure of that. Annie stopped at the bottom of the ramp. You invited everybody? Evelyn glanced back at her. Child, a homecoming without food and witnesses is just moving furniture. The front door opened easily beneath Evelyn's hand. Inside, sunlight fell across hardwood floors and simple furniture chosen to last. Her bedroom was on the first floor, close to a bathroom with handrails and a shower seat. The kitchen had broad counters, a deep sink, and cabinets low enough for her to reach without climbing. On the back wall hung a framed photograph recovered from the wet canvas bag. Evelyn beside Annie when she was small, both of them standing in front of the old fish table. Annie walked into the kitchen and covered her mouth. Grandma. Evelyn looked at the gas range, the cast iron skillet sitting on top of it, and the window facing the creek. This will do. Thomas exhaled as if he had been waiting 3 months for those words. Evelyn turned toward him. Do not look too relieved. I have not checked the porch from the sitting position yet. Outside, she lowered herself onto the bench. The marsh breeze lifted the edge of her cardigan. Below the porch, a new storage shed held crab traps, coils of rope, and a small freezer. Near the water, Earl had tied a used aluminum skiff to a rebuilt dock. Evelyn spotted it at once. Earl Jenkins, what did you do? Earl rubbed the back of his neck. A few of us found a boat with a sound motor. Thomas paid for the repairs, but the rest of us argued over who got to paint the name. Annie walked down the ramp toward the dock. Painted along the side of the skiff were the words Miss Evelyn. I cannot pull traps anymore, Evelyn said. Annie came back and kissed her cheek. Good thing you raised somebody who can. Thomas stood off to one side, letting the family and neighbors have the moment. Evelyn beckoned him with 2 fingers. Come here, Tommy. He crossed the porch. She reached into her purse and removed a single rusted key attached to a faded string. I found this in the pocket of the raincoat Earl brought from what was left of the house, she said. It does not open anything now. Thomas looked at the key in her palm. It opened my little house for you a long time ago, Evelyn continued. You keep it, so you remember what doors are for. He took the key with care. I will. You better. I know where you live now. The laughter that followed eased something in Annie's chest. For weeks she had woken from sleep hearing rain strike the apartment window, certain the floor beneath her was about to disappear. Standing on that porch, with Evelyn beside her and neighbors carrying food through the door, she felt a small part of the fear loosen its hold. Lunch was served on folding tables in the yard. Evelyn ate a modest plate under Martha's supervision, complaining that a woman could not celebrate properly, while someone counted how much salt went on her greens. Reverend Green offered a prayer for the house, for the hands that built it, and for every family still trying to recover after the rain. When the dishes had been cleared, Thomas asked Evelyn and Annie to sit with him on the porch. He carried a folder but did not open it until Evelyn nodded. There are other families along the creek who lost rooms, roofs, or vehicles, he said. Some elderly residents could not reach the shelter because they had no transportation. The hospital treated 3 people whose oxygen equipment lost power. Evelyn's expression grew serious. And what are you planning to do about it? Thomas smiled faintly. I was hoping you would tell me. He explained that he owned an unused building on higher ground near Reverend Green's church. It had once been a small outpatient office, but the clinic had moved. With renovation, it could hold beds, a kitchen, charging stations for medical devices, storage for clothing, and a van to transport older residents during severe weather. Annie looked at him. A storm shelter? A real one, Thomas said. Not an afterthought set up once the roads are already underwater. The church could oversee volunteers. The hospital could provide emergency training and medical supplies. I would fund the repairs and operating costs. Evelyn studied the marsh for several seconds. Do not put my name on it. I thought you might say that. Put the purpose on it. People need to know what happens when they get there. Annie glanced toward the bench beneath the porch roof, the open door. Evelyn smiled. That is exactly right. Thomas opened the folder and wrote the words at the top of the first page. Before winter, the old clinic had new paint, 20 beds, a stocked pantry, warm blankets, backup power, and a van with the open door storm shelter painted along its side. Above its entrance hung a wooden sign requested by Evelyn herself. Come in wet, leave warm. On opening day, Annie stood beside her grandmother as the first volunteers carried in boxes of canned soup and clean towels. Thomas remained near the back until Evelyn called out across the room. Tommy, quit standing around like a donor. Come help set up these chairs. He removed his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and obeyed. The shelter became part of Harbor Point before its new paint had time to fade. When heavy rain was forecast, Reverend Green unlocked the front doors before the first road flooded. Martha organized towels and bedding in labeled cabinets. Nurses from Whitmore Regional volunteered to check blood pressure, refill oxygen supplies, and make sure the older residents had their medication lists with them. Evelyn sat near the kitchen doorway with a blanket over her knees and corrected anyone who tried to serve thin soup. People did not leave their homes to drink hot water with carrots in it, she told Thomas one evening. He looked into the stock pot. I thought it was healthy. It may be healthy. It is still disappointing. Annie, stacking paper cups beside him, laughed. You heard her. More seasoning. Thomas handed her the salt. I built a shelter and somehow ended up taking orders in its kitchen. Evelyn lifted her chin from her chair. A man is never too rich to be useful. That became the rhythm of their lives. Annie finished her nursing program while working weekend shifts at the shelter and helping Evelyn with the crab traps when her heart allowed her to walk to the dock. She studied at the kitchen table beneath the photograph recovered from the rain. Her textbook spread beside baskets of cleaned shrimp. Thomas came for supper once or twice a month, at first arriving with flowers or bakery desserts until Evelyn told him plainly that family did not need to announce itself with gifts. Bring yourself, she said, and if you insist on bringing something, bring coffee. The good kind, not that hospital waiting room punishment. He obeyed. Over time, Annie stopped calling him Mr. Whitmore, unless they were in front of hospital staff. Evelyn never stopped calling him Tommy, even after he expanded 2 cardiac clinics and appeared on the cover of a state business magazine. She would point at the porch steps and say, Tommy, move that cooler before somebody breaks a hip. He always moved it. 4 years after the night Annie stood outside his porch, she graduated as a registered nurse. Evelyn attended in a wheelchair because the walk from the parking lot was too far, but when Annie crossed the stage, she stood anyway, leaning on Thomas with one hand and waving a folded program with the other. That's my baby, she called. People around them smiled. Annie covered her face for a second, laughing as she returned to her seat. Later, on the porch at Tidal Creek Road, Thomas handed Annie a small wrapped box. Inside was a stethoscope engraved with her name. She ran her thumb over the letters. You didn't have to do this. I know, he said. Evelyn, sitting beside them with a plate of peach cobbler, gave Annie a knowing look. Let him have his moment, child. He behaves better when someone lets him be kind. Annie began work in the emergency department at Whitmore Regional, the same entrance she had run through with her grandmother's wet clothes in her arms. She was good with frightened families and older patients who apologized for needing help. When someone arrived without a phone charger, dry socks, or anyone to call, Annie noticed. She never told them why. Evelyn grew slower with each season. She stopped going onto the boat and settled for watching Annie check the traps from the porch. Some days she was strong enough to season a pot of stew. Other days, Thomas brought supper and Martha helped arrange pillows behind her back while the sun went down over the creek. One April morning, Annie found Evelyn awake in bed, looking through the window toward the water. Her breathing was shallow, but she was calm. Grandma, do you need me to call the hospital? Evelyn shook her head. No hospital today, baby. Annie sat beside her and took her hand. You scared? Annie asked, because Evelyn had taught her that love meant asking honest questions. A little, Evelyn admitted. Mostly I am tired. She looked at Annie. You keep that door open. I will. And make sure Tommy eats something besides meetings and coffee. Annie gave a broken laugh. I will. Evelyn's fingers tightened once around hers. You did good, baby. By afternoon, she was gone. Thomas answered Annie's call before the second ring. She's gone, Annie said. For several seconds he did not speak. When he did, His voice sounded older than it had the day before. "When and where, sweetheart?" The Baptist church was full on the morning of Evelyn Carter's funeral. Fishermen in clean work shirts sat beside hospital nurses. Families who had once slept at the open door filled 2 rows near the back. Martha brought Annie a handkerchief and stayed close without speaking. Thomas entered alone in a plain dark suit. He took a place against the rear wall until Annie saw him. She left the front pew, walked the length of the church, and held out her hand. "Grandma would not let you hide back here." He looked toward the casket. No, she would not. Annie led him to the front and seated him beside her. After Reverend Green spoke, Annie told the congregation that Evelyn had spent her life making room, at her table, on her porch, in her prayers and in the futures of people who had arrived with nothing. Then she asked Thomas to speak. He walked to the pulpit holding the rusted key Evelyn had given him on the day her house was rebuilt. "When I was 22, he began. Evelyn Carter gave a hungry stranger fish stew, dry clothes, bus fare, and a night beneath her roof. She did not ask what he could repay. She saw a cold young man and opened her door. His eyes moved to Annie. Years later, her granddaughter came to my house in the rain and asked for less than Evelyn once gave me. Annie asked only for a place on the porch. I wish I could say I opened my door immediately. I did not. I hesitated. The church was still. Evelyn taught me that every door we own asks a question. When someone is cold, frightened, lost, or simply asking to be believed, who will we be on the other side? He placed the old key beside Evelyn's photograph and returned to his seat. Annie leaned her head against his shoulder, and Thomas covered her hand with his. Years later, during another night of hard rain, Annie was finishing a shift at the open door when someone knocked. Outside stood a boy holding his little sister's hand, both soaked through. "Our mama's car is stuck," he said. "We don't have anywhere to go." Annie opened the door wider. "Come in, honey. You don't have to explain before you get warm." Above them, the wooden sign shone under the porch light. "Come in wet, leave warm." This story reminds us that kindness is not measured by wealth, status, or the size of a house, but by the willingness to open a door when someone is cold, lost, and afraid. Annie needed more than shelter. She needed someone to believe her before judging her by her poverty or the color of her skin. Evelyn's simple act of compassion years earlier returned through Thomas, proving that goodness can travel across generations. True justice begins when we stop asking whether a suffering person deserves our help and start asking what kind of human being we choose to be when they knock on our door. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.